Hello, welcome to another video on our channel. Here we translate testimonies from people who have had near-death experiences and other spiritual experiences. Today we will learn the story of Elijah Sullivan. He says he died for 3 minutes, visited other planets, and saw the future. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. Leave a comment with your name and city. Now let's listen to Elijah's testimony. Hello everybody. My name is Elijah Sullivan, and today I want to share with you a story that completely changed my life. You know those experiences that we hear about and think, that only happens to other people? Well, I went through one of those. It all started in November 2019, when I caught this virus that was driving everyone crazy, the coronavirus. At the time, I lived in Seattle, and the hospitals were already full. There was no way I had to turn around at home. At first I thought it would be calm, like a bad flu. I isolated myself in my room, took some pharmaceutical medicine, and thought that soon I would be fine. But man, how wrong I was. After a week, things got really bad. Every time I breathed, it felt like I was inhaling broken glass. The fever didn't go down at all, and I had a constant feeling that I was going to suffocate at any moment. My family was super worried, of course. They saw that I was getting worse day after day, and they didn't know what else to do. I tried to hide it, say that I was getting better, but I didn't even believe it. When they finally realized that I wasn't going to make it on my own, they decided to take me to the hospital. That's when things started to get a little strange. Arriving at the hospital was like walking into a horror movie, really. Everyone was running back and forth, masks, protective equipment. It felt like I had entered a war zone. The doctors quickly examined me and confirmed it was indeed COVID-19. There wasn't even time to process the information properly. They already put me on a respirator. Look, I've never been through anything like this before. The feeling of having a machine breathing for you is scary. I tried to focus on something, anything, but my mind was a total mess. The medication they gave me started to mess with my head, and I no longer knew what was real and what was a hallucination. The hours dragged on, and I felt like I was sinking deeper and deeper into a dark hole. You know that feeling of being lost in a maze with no way out? That's more or less how I felt. I could hear the doctors and nurses talking, but the voices seemed distant, as if I were underwater. There was one night that was particularly difficult. I was exhausted, struggling to breathe, even with the respirator. I remember thinking, man, is this how it ends? It was that night that something happened that I will never forget. Suddenly I found myself floating above my own body. That's right, floating. At first I thought I was dreaming or delirious because of the medication, but it was so real, so vivid. I could see my body lying on the bed, the doctors and nurses around, all panicking. The crazy thing is that I no longer felt pain, fear, or anything. It was as if all worries had disappeared. I felt light, at peace. I decided to take a walk around the hospital. After all, what else could I do, right? I passed through other rooms, saw other patients fighting the disease, doctors and nurses doing their best to save lives. It was then that I noticed something different. There was a man, or rather a figure that seemed to be made of pure light. He radiated a serenity I had never seen before. When he approached, I felt an immense calm envelope me. He smiled and said, "Hello, Elijah. I am your spirit guide." Normally, I would have thought this was completely crazy, but at that moment, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world. I wasn't afraid, just enormous curiosity. I asked him what was happening, and he explained to me that I was going through a near-death experience. "You have a choice to make, Elijah," he said. "You can go back to your body or come with me and discover the secrets of the universe." Man, can you believe I didn't even hesitate? I said, "Let's do it." And that's when the real journey began. So there I was, ready to embark on a cosmic journey with my spiritual guide. There wasn't even time to think much, and we were already going up, leaving Earth behind. It was an indescribable feeling, as if I were pure energy, weightless, limitless. As we got further away, I could see our planet getting smaller and smaller. Man, what a view. That little blue ball in the middle of space, so fragile and at the same time so full of life. I kept thinking about how we worry about such small things on a daily basis, when in fact we are part of something much bigger. And the stars? My God, the stars. They seemed so close that I felt like I could touch them. The universe opened before my eyes in all its grandeur. Galaxies, nebulae, black holes, everything there, as if it were a cosmic light show just for me. I was completely amazed, like a child seeing the sea for the first time. I looked at my guide and said, "Man, this is incredible. Can we go further?" He smiled and said, "Of course, Elijah. Where do you want to go?" Without thinking twice, I asked to visit the moon. In the blink of an eye, we were there. Stepping onto the lunar surface was a surreal experience. The silence was absolute. The desolate landscape had a unique beauty. I kept looking at Earth from there, thinking about how small we are, and at the same time, part of something so immense. It was there, on the moon, that I started asking my guide a lot of questions. I asked about the Creator, about life on other planets, about the meaning of it all. He explained to me that the universe is full of life, in ways we can't even imagine. And the Creator? Well, he said that he is a force of immense love, but that he is a little sad about the things we are doing on Earth. I stood there, contemplating it all, feeling a peace I had never experienced before. It was as if, for the first time, I understood my place in the universe. After the moon, my guide asked me if I wanted to see other worlds. Man, of course I wanted to. We moved through space at unimaginable speed, and suddenly we were orbiting a planet that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. When we got down, I was stunned. The inhabitants of this place were very different from us. They were very tall, like much taller than any human, and they had pale skin that seemed almost translucent. The most incredible thing is that they didn't even care about our presence. My guide explained that we were in a kind of spiritual form, invisible to them. The architecture of the place was breathtaking. Imagine buildings made of crystal, but a crystal that changed color all the time. It was as if the buildings were alive, pulsing with energy. In the sky, flying vehicles crossed in all directions without making any noise. I was fascinated by their level of technology. There were things that I couldn't even understand what they were for. I asked my guide if we could talk to someone, but he said it wasn't a good idea. Something about not interfering with the natural development of the species. As we watched, I kept thinking about how Earth seemed backwards in comparison. But then my guide explained to me that each civilization has its own pace of evolution, and that there is no point in comparing. The important thing is to learn from the experiences of others. We spent a lot of time there, just observing the daily lives of those people. It was incredible to see how they interacted with each other, always with respect and harmony. I didn't see anything that looked like conflict or fighting. I kept thinking about what it would be like if we could live like this on Earth. Before we left, I asked my guide if there were many other planets with intelligent life. He smiled and said, "More than you can imagine, Elijah. The universe is a vast place full of wonder." Man, at that moment, I felt so small and at the same time so connected to everything. Our next stop was another planet, very different from the first. As soon as we arrived, the first thing I saw were huge pyramids rising on the horizon. But they weren't like the pyramids in Egypt, no. These were gigantic, made of a material I had never seen before, and emitted a soft light. I was mesmerized looking at those structures. My guide noticed my fascination and said, "These pyramids are much older than those on Earth, Elijah." Then I got curious, right? I asked who had built it all. His response left me speechless. "They were built by the same beings who visited Earth thousands of years ago," he said. Dude, just imagine. I was like, "Do you mean to say that the aliens that people say helped build the pyramids in Egypt really exist?" He laughed at my excitement and explained that the story was a little more complicated than that. He said that several advanced civilizations had already visited Earth over the millennia, some leaving more visible marks than others. But then he got serious and told me something that moved me. He said that humanity was considered both the Creator's masterpiece and greatest mistake. I was a little confused by this and asked him to explain further. He told me that humans have incredible potential to do wonderful things, to evolve and connect with the universe in a unique way. But we also have a frightening capacity for destruction and self-destruction. If you don't learn to live in peace and respect each other and the planet, there could be serious consequences, he said. He said something about an inevitable purification if things continued the way they are. I was shocked, you know? It was a lot of information to process at once. I started thinking about all the wars, the destruction of the environment, the way we treat each other. For the first time, I saw clearly how these things might appear to the most evolved beings in the universe. But my guide didn't want to discourage me. He said there was still hope, that each of us has the power to make a difference. That's why you're here, Elijah, he said. To see, learn, and then share. I was there reflecting on everything I had seen and heard, when suddenly I felt a strong pull. It was as if someone had grabbed me and pulled me back into my body with all their might. In an instant, I was back in my body in the hospital, surrounded by doctors and nurses. The first thing I felt was pain. Much pain. After having spent a while without feeling anything, that was quite a shock. I coughed, tried to breathe, and heard agitated voices around me. Little by little, I began to understand what had happened. Apparently, I had had a strong allergic reaction to one of the medications they were using to treat me. My heart had stopped for more than 3 minutes. 3 minutes. To me, it felt like I had spent days traveling the universe. The doctors were surprised to see me awake and conscious. They kept asking questions, checking my vitals, seeming to not believe what they were seeing. I wanted to tell them everything I had experienced, but I could barely speak. In the days that followed, as I recovered, I couldn't stop thinking about my experience. Had it been real? Or was it just my brain creating hallucinations because of the lack of oxygen? But it felt so vivid, so real. One thing I knew for sure. I was no longer the same Elijah who had walked into that hospital. Something had changed inside me, and I knew my life would never be the same again. As I got better, I started telling my family and closest friends about what had happened. Some thought I was delusional, others were fascinated, but everyone noticed that I was different, calmer, more, at peace with myself. When I was finally released from the hospital, I knew I had a mission ahead of me. I couldn't just go back to my normal life after everything I had seen and learned. I needed to do something with this knowledge, this experience. But what? After I left the hospital, my life took a huge turn. You couldn't just go back to your routine as if nothing had happened, you know? I had seen the universe, man. I had visited other planets, talked to a spiritual guide. How was I supposed to sit at my desk and pretend that everything was normal? In the first few days at home, I spent hours looking at the sky, remembering everything I had seen. My family thought I was a bit crazy, but they were super patient. I think they were just happy that I was alive, to be honest. I started reading a lot about spirituality, quantum physics, astronomy, anything that could help me better understand what I had experienced. The more I read, the more I realized that there was much more to the universe than we imagine. One thing that completely changed was my outlook on life and death. Before, I was terrified of dying. Now, it's not that I want to die, far from it, but I'm not afraid anymore. I know that death is just a passage, that there is much more beyond this life. Another thing that became clear to me was the importance of treating others and the planet well. I remembered what my guide had said about humanity being the Creator's masterpiece and biggest mistake. I started to ask myself, what can I do to be more of a masterpiece and less of a mistake? I started paying more attention to my actions, you know? Like how I treat people on a daily basis, how I deal with the environment. I started recycling, consuming less, being kinder to everyone. It seems silly, but it makes a huge difference. My relationship with spirituality has also changed. Before, I was kind of skeptical about these things. Now I know there is something greater, a force that connects everything in the universe. Not that I suddenly became religious, but I started to respect other people's beliefs more and seek my own connection with the divine. The crazy thing is that people started to notice this change in me. Friends, coworkers, even strangers on the street commented that I seemed different, more serene. And you know what? I really felt different. It was as if I had woken up from a deep sleep and was seeing the world through new eyes for the first time. After a while, I felt like I needed to share my story with more people. I couldn't keep that to myself, you know? I started slowly, talking to close friends, then small groups in my community. At first I was a little nervous. I thought, what if they think I'm crazy? But then I realized that it didn't matter what anyone else thought. The important thing was to get the message across, share what I had learned. I started organizing small talks, nothing too formal. Just me, sitting in a room, telling my story to whoever would listen. And man, people's response was incredible. Many people came to talk to me afterwards, telling me about their own experiences, asking questions. The coolest thing was seeing how my story touched people in different ways. There were people who said they started to value life more after listening to me. Others said they began to think more about the meaning of existence. Some even changed their habits and started taking more care of the environment. I always emphasized in my speeches the importance of compassion and empathy. He talked about how, from space, the Earth seemed so small and fragile. How ridiculous it was for us to fight over such small things when we are part of something so big. Over time, I started to receive invitations to speak in bigger places. Schools, companies, even on some local TV shows. Every time I told my story, it seemed like I understood a little more about it. You know? It was as if I was slowly unraveling the true meaning of that experience. The most rewarding thing was seeing that my story was really making a difference in people's lives. I received emails, messages, from people telling me how they had changed after listening to me. This gave me even more strength to continue. Of course, not everyone believed me. There were people who thought it was all an invention, or that I had hallucinated because of the medication. But that's okay. I understood. After all, if someone had told me a story like that before my experience, I probably wouldn't have believed it either. The important thing is that I knew the truth. I knew what I had lived, what I had learned, and if I could use this experience to make the world a little better, it would be worth it. Today, a few years after that crazy hospital experience, my life is completely different. Not that I've become some kind of guru or anything. Far from it. I'm still the Elijah I always was, just with a very different perspective on life. My job now is basically to spread the message I received during my near-death experience. I travel a lot, giving lectures, participating in events about spirituality and consciousness. I also wrote a book telling my story in detail. It was difficult to put everything down on paper, but it was worth it. One thing I always make a point of saying is that I don't have all the answers. Far from it. In fact, the more I learn, the more questions I have. But I think that's the fun of it, you know? Stay curious, keep searching. Something that completely changed was my relationship with fear. Before, I was worried about a lot of things. Now, of course I still worry, I'm human, but is different. It's like I've gained a greater perspective. When you see the Earth from up there, tiny in the middle of space, your problems seem much smaller. Another thing I take very seriously is the idea that each of us can make a difference. I remember what my guide said about humanity being the Creator's masterpiece and biggest mistake. Every day I wake up thinking, how can I be more of a masterpiece today? Sometimes it's small things like being more patient in traffic or helping a neighbor. Other times they are larger projects such as environmental awareness campaigns. A lot of people ask me if I'm afraid of dying now. The truth is no. Not that I want to die, I love being alive. But I know that death is not the end. It's just a ticket to something different. It gives me incredible peace. Looking to the future, my biggest desire is to continue learning and sharing. I want to understand more and more about the universe, about our connection with everything that exists. And I want to help other people see the world in a broader, more compassionate way. You know, sometimes I stop and think, man, what if I hadn't gotten COVID back then? What if I hadn't had that reaction to the medicine? My life would be completely different. It's crazy to think how such a frightening experience ended up turning into the most incredible thing that ever happened to me. If there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this. Life is much more than we imagine. There are so many things beyond what we can see or touch, and each of us has an important role in this crazy universe. We just need to open our eyes, our hearts, and be willing to learn. And that's it. This is my story. A journey that started in a hospital bed and took me to the stars. I hope that in some way, it can inspire you to look up at the sky every now and then and ask yourselves, what is my role in all of this? Because, believe me, each of us is an important piece in this cosmic puzzle. So, what did you think of this incredible story? Leave your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Activate the notification bell to be notified with each new video. Let's bring more people the hope that there is life beyond what the eyes can see.